and welcome to 5 Pillars of Aging. I'm Dr. Mary Flett. Today we're going to be talking about emotional economics, the 4 E's. So the first of the 4 E's is I am enough. What does this mean as we age? Any of us who have grown up with low self-esteem might have experienced questions about who we are. Our culture today, unfortunately, tends not to even value much about being older. So you may have experienced a great deal of satisfaction in your work and enjoyed perhaps influence and power. You may have been able to exercise choice whenever you wanted. One of the challenges that happens as we age, particularly after we retire, is a change in status. And this transition oftentimes begs the question about whether or not I am enough. Now, this is very much a gendered question. What I mean by gendered question is that because our culture values men, and men more than women, oftentimes what women do has been undervalued. Maybe you grew up as a woman with a belief that you weren't enough, that somehow you couldn't do enough. Interestingly, as we age, it shifts. When we get into our 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, women tend to experience themselves as growing and finding footing. Now, some of this is also rooted in generational biases and stereotypes. So fortunately, our children may not have these same experiences as we do. But those of us who were raised in the 50s and 60s, with Donna Reed as our model, may believe that we were to take second role, may perhaps believe that we were to sit in the background and not take charge of things, when in reality, it has been our responsibility to care for our families, to care for the people that we love, and to provide a lot of roles within the community, caring roles. So what does it mean to be enough? When we get to be a certain age, there is nothing to prove and nothing to protect. As Father Richard Rohr says here in Falling Upward, I am who I am, and it is enough. Coming to accept this fact oftentimes requires that we let go of beliefs that we've had in the past, and doing this can sometimes be challenging. So let's start with some very basic questions. I want you to take a moment, and you can pause this at any time, to really sit and reflect on what answers you come up with. Maybe you would like to even write down these answers on a separate piece of paper. You can pause the video at any time and take the time to write down these answers. The first question is, what messages were you given about your self-worth growing up? For example, if you were told that you were perfect just as you are, that you were smart, that you were talented, that you had unlimited possibilities open to you, then maybe these messages have stayed with you over the years. On the other hand, perhaps you were given messages of not being good enough, or perhaps you received messages silently, just with a look that told you that you didn't live up to what expectations were. I don't think there's anything more potent and more destructive than having someone who we love and look up to tell us they are disappointed in what we have done or what we have said. So those were messages we got as children or as young people. The question is, at this stage of your life, do you still believe them? And if you do, can you construct any sort of an argument of why you no longer need to hold on to those beliefs? Take a moment, write down your answers to this question. Now, second question, how do these messages influence your decision about where you live, where you spend your time, where you spend your money? These are questions that are deeply rooted in our self-worth. If you do not believe that you deserve to live in a place that is safe, that is comfortable, and you have financial constraints, perhaps you construct arguments about why you will not move from where you live into a place that may be actually better for you. Now, I don't mean to suggest that there aren't realistic constraints that we all need to face as we age. But sometimes we limit ourselves before we even are willing to explore what options may be out there. Obviously, there are many, 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 many questions that you can explore around this first number in the emotional economics. If you believe you are enough, as Richard Rohr says, then that is all you need. Two more questions. What would you do differently if you really believed that who you are is enough? So for this question, I want you to think about letting go of those limitations. If you were enough, what would you have in your life? If you were enough, what would you no longer be seeking? If you were enough, how would you feel about where you live, who you associate with, where you eat, what kind of car you drive? And now, the more potent question. What stops you from believing this? Again, take some time, pause this video, and just write down all of the things that you think stop you from believing that you are enough. I hope that exercise was useful. We're going to go on to the second of the four emotional economics. I have enough. I want you to think about what makes up a typical day in your life. What gives you satisfaction? One of the challenges we face as we get older is having to organize our time. When we're raising a family, most of our energy is devoted towards their schedules, making sure we have meals, making sure the kids are bathed, making sure people get to work on time, making sure that homework is done. That's organizing somebody else's life. Once we've retired and the kids have left home, we now have an opportunity to really take a look at how we organize our own life. What do you have enough of? Do you have enough time to do the things that you like? Do you have enough money to do the things that you need to do? Do you have enough connection with others, whether it be an individual or with social groups, with your family, with friends? And do you have enough connection with your inner life? Goethe, the famous German poet, philosopher, and writer, came up with 9 items he said were requisites for contented living. Grace enough to confess your sins and forsake them. Patience enough to toil until something good is accomplished. Charity enough to see some good in your neighbor. Health enough to make work a pleasure. Wealth enough to support your needs. Strength to battle with difficulties and overcome them. Love enough to be useful and helpful to others. Faith enough to make the real things of God. And hope enough to remove all anxious fears concerning the future. So again, as we did with the first of the enoughs, I want you to take a moment to just answer these questions, think and reflect about them at your own pace. What does it take for you to be content? Now, I use that word specifically because contentment varies from person to person. Some days you may be content with just having a cup of coffee or hearing from a friend or one of your children. You may be content to just sit around and listen to nice music or to read a book. Those are all relaxation things. There also may be days where you're content with having accomplishing a lot of work. Perhaps you've gotten through all of your chores, or you've created a beautiful poem, or maybe you've finished all of the bookkeeping you need to do for the month. whatever brings you a sense of contentment. What does it take for you to be content? How do you manage your commitments and desires? Now, commitments and desires are very interesting. Commitments are things that we have agreed, we've given our word that we are going to do. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel pressured into agreeing to do something. I have commitments to make appearances. I have commitments to write daily. I have commitments to friends and family. Sometimes those commitments get in the way of what I really want to do. So that means that I have to make a decision. That means I have to make a choice. How do you manage those choices? How do you decide between doing something that you really, really want to do, but may not be able to do because you have a commitment to someone or something else? How well do you know your body? I struggled all my life with weight issues. And truth be told, there are times when I find myself just putting food in my mouth, even though I'm not hungry. How do you know when you've had enough? This is just one example. How do you know you've had enough sleep? How do you know you've had enough exercise? How do you know you've had enough touch? Another question here is, who will care for you? Do you have enough resources in place? Do you have a team in mind of who might be able to support you? Many of us are solo agers. And one of the challenges, even though we really enjoy our independence, one of the challenges is the undeniable fact that we are going to need to reach out and ask for help at some time. Who's on your team? Who have you recruited? Do you have enough people so that if someone says yes, but then they can't show up for you, you have a backup? So who is on your team? Oftentimes, if you don't like the sports analogy, who is on your board of directors? Who do you have on your volunteer board? That may be a better way to look for some of you. Very important issue around having enough is, do you have enough money? Certainly we're given these messages every single day on media. And I want to suggest to you that having enough money is really a very individual thing. I invite you not to be intimidated by what you hear that you have to have hundreds of thousands of dollars. You have to decide how to manage your money. You have to decide what it is that you can put aside for yourself in the future. Those are all absolutely necessary skills. But you also have to decide what will be enough. Do you have a plan B or a plan C or a plan D? I have a very dear friend of mine who always chides me because I tend to be very optimistic about things, and she looks at me and shakes her head and says, yes, but do you have a plan B in case things don't work out? That's a valid question. What is your plan B? What would happen, for example, if you were no longer able to live in your home? Do you have a plan B for that? What would happen? So sadly, we've seen this happen now with climate change all around the world, where perhaps our asset, our major asset, if we're so lucky, is living in a home that we own. What happens if that's taken away? How connected are you with family or friends, with your community of faith, and with your neighbors? One of the challenges that I think COVID has given us to really think about is how we connect. Do we have enough ways to stay in relationship with people who matter to us and who can fill us up with the things that we need? Having enough love, having enough social contact, having enough stimulation, finding ways to decline the invitation to isolation and withdrawal. Do you have enough medical care? The third of the 4 E's is believing there is enough. Now, In the second, we talked about having enough. So that's the ownership of it. The third E is about believing there is enough. And I have to tell you, there are people who do not believe that there is enough. This is known as a scarcity mentality. So looking at these three glasses, we have an empty glass, a glass that is either half full or half empty, and a glass that's pretty much filled to the top. How do you describe these glasses? What emotional things come up for you when you see the empty glass? Does this scare you, or is this something exciting, something that you can fill? The middle glass, are you concerned that things are going down, or are you happy that you still have half a glass left? And the third one, do you try to preserve it at all costs and not let any fall out? Or do you see this as an opportunity to empty and fill again? Sarah von Brethnach, the author of Simple Abundance, wrote, "Whatever we are waiting for, peace of mind, contentment, grace, the inner awareness of simple abundance, it will surely come to us, but only when we are ready to receive it with an open and grateful heart." Simple abundance, not scarcity. So here are some questions. Once again, you may want to write down your answers and pause this while you're thinking about these things. What did you have enough of as a child? What did you have enough of as a teenager? What have you had enough of as an adult? And what do you have enough of now? These are things that you might add to a gratitude list if you don't already have one. Now take a moment and think back. What was in short supply for you? What did you not have enough of as a child? What was lacking or missing when you were a teenager? What have you wished for as an adult or had to make changes in your life to accommodate the fact that there wasn't enough of something as an adult? And what is missing for you now? How do your beliefs about having enough influence your decisions? If you look at your shelves and you don't have enough something on them, do you immediately go to the store and procure 2 or 3 or 4 things just to make sure you have enough? And what is your long-term plan for having enough? Are you able to put small amounts aside weekly, monthly? Or do you just hope that things will turn out for the best eventually? Now, really put on a different mindset here. If you knew there was enough, how would you think or act differently? How would you feel knowing that there was enough? There was no need to worry. You would always have whatever it was that you needed. And how would you think differently or act differently if you knew there would never be enough? And here we come to the final E of the 4 E's. I know what's good enough. Now, some of you may have been told when you were growing up to just accept that something was just going to be good enough. I often think of the Goldilocks story where Goldilocks goes in and she tries the porridge, she tries the beds. One is too hot, one is too soft. And then there's the just right. I really like to think of our aging process as coming to terms with what is just right, what is good enough for us. This doesn't mean settling for something we don't like. It does mean knowing and understanding ourselves well enough to know when to say, it's okay, I don't need to do any more. Meister Eckhart was a visionary in the early days, and I really enjoy reading his writings. Coming from the Middle Ages, there were things that certainly were very different from the times that we live in. He said, I am what I wanted, and I want what I am. This is a profound quote. If you want more, and you're always seeking more, then more is what you are. And if you want for nothing, and you have all your needs met, then all your needs are met. And if you continually seek for something and feel always as if you are never going to measure up or ever be able to get what it is you wanted, you will always be wanting. So I call this the Goldilocks Zone. How do you define your Goldilocks Zone? What is just right for you in whatever area of life you need to look at? What is just right in terms of your living environment, how much room you need, the objects you need to have? What is just right in terms of how much you eat every day, what gives you pleasure in terms of food? What's good enough for you in terms of how frequently you need to do something or who you need to be around? What areas of your life do you find yourself doing too much? What areas of your life do you have difficulty letting go? How would you define settling for something? And what's the difference between settling and accepting? Oftentimes, I've seen this debate when faced with some harsh medical decisions, particularly around end-of-life issues. When is it enough if you are living with a chronic illness or even a terminal illness? How do you decide when it is enough? When do you accept the fact that you may not be able to do more? And ultimately, what is it that you are grateful for? What is it that has been good enough for you in your life? One of the challenges I think we face growing older in this culture is we lose our uniqueness. Sometimes we forget just how unique we are. And even though we are one among many, I used to be just a bulb in the ground, it is inevitable that we become our own unique selves. You have blossomed the way you have blossomed. And even though you are still one among many, you are unique in that. Thank you for spending time with me and answering these questions. I'm Dr. Mary Flett, and this is 5 Pillars of Aging.